Originally, I was gonna put Red Hood at a 3 out of 5, but after a simple yet effective buff, things are about to change. Welcome! I hope you've been able to snag a copy of the first anniversary unit, because after a week of back and forth discussion and some waiting, we ended up with a version of Red Hood that's finally worthy of being part of such a momentous celebration. In this guide and analysis video, I'm going to be explaining how you can use Red Hood to the fullest, and how to invest your resources to make the best use of her kit. This is going to be an interesting one. My name is Psyche, let's get started. Before I get into the review, I want to briefly talk about the Red Hood situation. When she debuted, her damage was not very impressive. This of course sparked a lot of discussion, a good portion of the fanbase complained, but luckily after a week of the anniversary's release, they announced a buff to Red Hood's burst skill, where the damage is now closer to what normal sniper users deal. This really should have been the original numbers, but the major takeaway from this is that, in my opinion, when we get another situation like this, you always wait. Wait for a week for things to settle down, because one of three things are gonna happen. The unit's kit takes longer to figure out, and people on day one just haven't realized it yet. Number 2, they will buff the unit in the near future, as the unit really is underpowered, and Shift Up also thinks that it could use a buff. Or, the unit really is weak, no buffs are made, and we just have to settle with the state of the unit the way it is. In this case, number 2 happened. I knew that was a possibility given they've done this kind of thing before, and in my PSA video, I said that she would need a damage buff of around 20 to 30% to be good, and that's actually what happened. I'm also unlisting the PSA video as it's no longer relevant, but I'll leave the link to it in the description or my discussion playlist if you still want to take a look. Moral of the story, if you want to fully understand a new character, you don't commit your polls on day 1. You wait. Alright, with that out of the way, let's finally get started. Red Hood's kit looked very unique when it was first announced, so unique that it had 2 pages of description instead of 1. Let's just hope we don't reach Genshin levels of skill descriptions. As usual, I will be using my level priority ratings as I have in my past guides. Red Hood skill 1 gives more charge speed by landing normal attacks. You can basically just see this as a free 20 to 30% charge speed buff, assuming you can just spam the cell manually to get the stacks quicker. There is a cap on charge speed, but luckily Red Hood can ignore this cap, as she deals bonus charge damage if there's any access after 100%. This one gets medium priority. It's a fairly linear increase to her overall damage. You can max it out if you want, but a level 7 or so is a comfortable spot in case you want to budget your resources. Skill 2 gives Red Hood permanent pierce. This is better than Alice, who only gets it if her health is above 80%. She also gets a bonus buff for the 3 different bursts. I'll cover that in a moment, but essentially, this is either a low priority if you don't plan on using her as a DPS, and a high priority if you are. And given the recent change, yes, you most definitely want to use her as a DPS. But hey, never hurts to have options. The type 1 and 2 buffs are okay, I guess, but the attack up is the most valuable part of this skill. Finally, the big one. Red Hood has all of types 1, 2, and 3. While she mainly excels as a type 3 DPS, the option is there in case you want to use her as a buffer or taunter. Leveling the burst skill will upgrade all 3 of her bursts, so regardless of how you plan to use Red Hood, this one gets a high priority, as all playstyles will benefit from this one being invested. Let's talk about the 3 bursts. Red Hood has a burst cooldown of 40 seconds, but the first time you use her type 1 and 2 burst, she gets an instant refresh, meaning you can use the next one immediately. In levels that can end quickly, you can either use her types 1 or 2 burst in the first rotation, and use them again in the second. This does enable some cool teams that I'll talk about later. But the one thing to keep in mind is that her type 3 burst does not have an instant refresh, so if you use that, she cannot burst at all in the second rotation. The type 1 burst is a huge team-wide attack up that lasts for 10 seconds. Not only is this higher than Leader's burst, but the duration is also doubled. Type 2 is the odd one out. She gains taunt for 10 seconds, and also gains a healing potency increase, which combined with her skill 2, makes it so that she can self-heal. This is generally not that helpful if she's a DPS. I mean, I don't know why you would want to taunt your damage dealers so they die quicker, but a use for this might be in a Snow White team, where she can sacrifice herself to keep Snow White safe, while also providing an attack up with a type 1 burst. Now, for the type 3, she will change the weapon she uses temporarily and gains a whopping 100% charge speed buff, and also increases the AoE of each shot. This makes it so that you can just hold down the fire button and she will continuously shoot. It doesn't say it in the description, but it also gives her infinite ammo. Better yet, this also gains Pierce, so it's really good on boss fights. You can still reload it for whatever reason, but just hold down the left click or leave your finger on the screen and you're good. This is also where she got buffed. She originally only dealt around 27% of her attack, which is like half of other sniper users. But they changed this to reflect what she was advertised for. Just like other meta DPS units, Red Hood benefits from a good amount of investments. I don't think she's a case like Alice where you need to have a particular overload line, but it doesn't hurt to have them. I'm going to be using my tier list for overload attributes, but don't feel pressured as if you have to get certain attributes. Even without overload gear, Red Hood will do just fine. On the tier below must-haves, we have attack and charge speed. This is because attack is always nice, and Red Hood's skill 1 will convert excess charge speed into more damage, so having these lines will contribute to bigger numbers. On the tier below, we have elemental damage. The stat actually becomes quite the difference maker in raid content, as having elemental damage is pretty huge. And many regard Red Hood as an Iron Code Alice anyways. That being said, not everyone focuses on raid content, and it only accounts for 1/5 of the enemy selections in the game. On the better than nothing tier, we have crit and max ammo count. This is because Red Hood already gets infinite ammo when bursting anyways, so having a bigger meg will only help when she's not bursting. On the useless tier, we have charge damage, and as usual, this is because of how charge damage works in the game. It's even less impactful than crit, and since Red Hood already has a special conversion of it, in order for the stat to be worth it, the overload line is basically useless. Hit rate because sniper users already have pinpoint accuracy, and defense is still defense. For cubes, it's not going to be a major difference no matter which one you use, but for the sake of accessibility, use Resilience or Bastion. If there's no space or none of them are leveled that high, you can also use Ajun or Wingman. Don't think too much about it, again, it's not a big improvement. Red Hood has some straightforward gameplay. In fact, you can even argue that she has zero gameplay at all, as she's perfectly fine if you just put the game on auto. She shares a lot of similarities as Alice, and while Alice is capable of some of the highest damage numbers in the game, she also requires manual play, which may not be everyone's cup of tea. After the damage buff, Red Hood's damage is coming in close to some of the highest, but sources say Alice is still slightly better. That being said, when you burst as Red Hood, you literally just have to hold your finger or mouse click on screen, and she'll do the rest. Given that you don't have to put in any effort to play her, I think having slightly smaller numbers than Alice is a fair compromise. Now we talk about teams, and this is my favorite portion of the video. Because Red Hood has 3 different bursts, in addition to being a solid DPS, she also enables some new team comps that normally would not be possible. If you use her for the buffer role in campaign content, then stuff like CDR doesn't really matter since you're expecting the level to end in like 2 burst rotations anyways. You can use her as the sole type 1 unit, since as long as you're not using her burst, you get a freebie refresh on the first use. So you can use her type 1 burst twice in a row in subsequent rotations. The attack up she provides is no joke, and is a considerable improvement over leader if CDR or defense is not a concern. With Red Hood as a buffer, you can push campaign levels pretty hard, even if you have a combat power deficiency. Her type 2 burst is a weird one. The only instance where I would see it in any use is if you plan on sacrificing Red Hood to save someone else. I can see that being useful in a Snow White team where it taunts away damage for Snow White to ready the nuke. If you're good with iframing, sure, it's no noise, but a guaranteed 10-second taunt is still decent. It's a gimmicky skill to be sure, and if you're using her as a DPS, I would not recommend using this to die faster. Now the type 3 burst. As simple as it gets, I will literally copy the team section from my Alice video and it would still make sense. Basically, Red Hood pairs well with a lot of the other meta supports and DPSs in the game. I'm really not going to spend too much time here as I would just be repeating a lot of what I said in my Alice video. But you can also try pairing her with Alice or Maxwell, as they both give charge speed, which will increase Red Hood's numbers even more. You got your classic leader novel comp, the bunny comp, the Tiga comp. While admittedly Red Hood is a sniper user, she gains permanent pierce, which can sometimes work as the finisher for campaign levels, but she's most comfortable for bosses or bringing into raid or challenge content. Either way, you will select one of her 3 bursts to specialize in and build a team around. Most of the time though, again, this is going to be a DPS role. Red Hood's flexibility, ease of use, and high damaging numbers no doubtly puts her at the top of the podium. She is insane in all sorts of content in the game and will be a very welcome addition to your roster. Especially if you're a new player, she's gonna carry you for a while. Given the recent buff, I have absolutely no problem putting her at a 5 out of 5. But that's not really a surprise to you at this point. Before I end the video, I want to talk about something, and it's quite important. I started making this guide right before the buff was announced. And if the buff was not made, I would have given Red Hood a 3 out of 5 rating. The simple damage increase was all it took for her to reach the top, and I'll explain my rationale for the previous rating. Before the buff, Red Hood's damage was okay. It wasn't competitive enough to reach the top, and you can probably estimate her to be within the lower end of the top 10 DPSs in the game. But assuming that's the case, for me who is in the late game, top 10 is usually not good enough. Because if you think about it, every team will most likely contain 2 or 3 damage dealers. This means that if you do have all the meta units built up, Red Hood will probably be placed as 3rd or 4th priority. Or if she has elemental advantage. Let's say you're playing Union Raid and you need 3 teams. It's possible that all slots will already be filled out, because instead of using the 10th most powerful unit, why not just use the very best and get a better score? In terms of DPS usage, I would highly hesitate putting pre-buff Red Hood in a team unless there's a specific situation. Her other usage will be as a buffer for campaign content, which is still actually really decent, as that hasn't received any changes. So that buff was all it took for them to salvage the situation, but I do want to clear this up that I do think it's important that we hold a character like this in high regard, as this is a Pilgrim that's part of a pretty big event that has an FGO SSR drop chance. If the buff didn't happen, this would have been the thumbnail. Overall, Red Hood is like a low-maintenance Alice with a lot of flexibility. Sure, she's described as an Iron Code Alice, but for me, that's good enough. If we take a look at the top performers, other than OG Snow White, we don't actually have anyone that's Iron Code, so it never hurts to expand the roster of top DPS units with varying elements. If only we got one that was Wind Code. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this guide and analysis. I'm definitely going to be a bit more skeptical of riding the hype train going forward until a consensus on a new character has been made. Luckily, they pretty much solved every concern I have with the anniversary with this recent patch, and this new Pilgrim is no doubt going to carry you for a while. Thank you for watching, and always remember, have fun with the game.